Tens of thousands of Syrian refugees fleeing the violence in their homeland. Many are in refugee camps. Now, Robert Granke is the executive director of Canadian Lutheran World Relief. He was in Syrian refugee camps yesterday, and up next, he's visiting programs that his organization supports for Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And we've reached him this morning. Good morning, Robert Granke.
Yes, good morning, Marcy.
So where exactly have you been?
Well, yesterday I was in Jordan, flew into Amman the day before, and then traveled about 100 kilometers north towards the Syrian border, about 70 kilometers from the border with Syria, and visited a camp called the Za'atari refugee camp.
What did you see there?
A camp that currently is home to 45,000, almost 46,000 people.
What kind of conditions did you see there?
Well, generally at this time, it's what I would call a typical refugee camp. Lots of tents lined up in a row. They've had the good success of putting in some crushed rock because they are expecting some rains before too long, and without that rock, it would be a bit of a quagmire with the mud underneath. But generally speaking, I think the conditions are all right, but I think the biggest concern that people have right now is the winter that's approaching and how people will manage with that in mind.
And what is your assessment of how they could manage? Like what's missing there?
Well, many of the families that we visited with, especially the children, in fact, about 75% of the people in this camp are women and children, came with basically all that they had, all they could carry, clothes on their back, and they're in summer-type clothing. And the winter here, while it's not nearly as severe as Winnipeg, certainly it is getting very cold. It gets below freezing at night and rain. So there's immediate need of some footwear, some underwear, some warmer hoodies and things of that nature, especially for the children. And they're taking some steps to try to improve the conditions in their tents. They're adding some small shelters with the capacity to heat them. And all of that has to happen in a fairly quick order. What
does the future hold for these people?
Well, that's a very big question. You know, the estimate right now is that 2.5 million Syrians are displaced from their homes. A large number of those are spilling over into Jordan and Turkey and Lebanon. The UN is estimating that if the fighting continues within Syria, that this will grow to a number of 4 million. This particular camp will probably double from the size that I saw it yesterday to somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 people. So if there's no steps taken to find a political solution to the crisis within the country, it does not bode well for people who are having to flee some really awful situations within Syria and live elsewhere for hopefully a short period of time.
Where are you going next, Robert?
Well, I'm in Jerusalem right now, and I'm going to be spending the week here visiting some of the programs that we support as an organization, Canadian Lutheran World Relief, and some of that is focused on healthcare. So one of the things I'll be listening for is the people from Gaza, how well they're being cared for in the aftermath of the crisis in the last 10 days or so. There were already some patients from Gaza coming into Jerusalem to receive some medical assistance, and that will be probably our more immediate focus. But we really do want to ramp up our support for the people who are from Syria because from what we can see, we don't believe this situation is going to go by anytime quick.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, for the stories we hear from people within Syria, the fighting continues. Many of these people who were there, they're business people who had full and productive lives with houses, and now they're living in tents. They were forced to flee because either they would have been killed or were asked to be a part of the army and kill other people, and they refused to do that. So one can only hope that the UN and some of the major players that have some form of relationship with Syria will be able to find a political solution to this crisis.
How concerned have you been about your own personal safety during this trip?
Well, we have partners on the ground who are able to receive us and give us guidance. We were told that there was a chance that we might not be able to make it into the camp because there are flare-ups that occur. And when you put 45,000 people together, many of them don't know one another, and they're thrust into a makeshift city that only was created back in July. There are social issues that come up, and part of what we're trying to do while we're there is to help with what we call psychosocial programs, and that's help people come to terms with the things that have happened to them and help their children try to deal with some of the trauma that they experienced in Syria. But I trust my local partners, and I'm happy to say the day yesterday went without any trouble at all.
Now, after everything you've been seeing, what's your message to people here?
Well, my hope, and I think our organization's hope, is that Syria doesn't go under the radar, that, the crises nearby here and in other parts of the world, we need to remind ourselves that there are Syrians that are suffering greatly from this and that they need some assistance. So we've issued an appeal as an organization, and we're hoping people will donate and help, especially with the whole winterizing process, which we estimate that you can buy some winter clothing and some temporary shelters and provide heaters for about $200 a family. So we'll be doing things like that to try to communicate with our constituents.
Thanks for your time this morning, Robert. Appreciate it.
It's good to talk to you, Marcy.
That's Robert Granke of Manitoba. He's the Executive Director of the Canadian Lutheran World Relief. We reached him this morning in Jerusalem.
CBC Music, Canada's free online music service. Over 41